What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by my fellow host, Salman Huck. We're excited to bring another NBA Redraft to you, so let's jump right in.
Today, we are redrafting the 2010 NBA Draft Lottery. So I know this was quite a while back, and some of these guys aren't even active players anymore, which I'm sure will factor into our decisions on where they end up in our redraft. So if you're not familiar with the format so far, we're going to announce the pick, the actual pick from real life, and then Salman and I will take turns essentially saying who we would have drafted instead and explain why. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So with the first overall pick, the Washington Wizards selected point guard John Wall out of Kentucky. So who did you have them taking with the first overall pick?
Yeah, I had him going Paul George, who to me is clearly the best player in the draft. And, still, even to this day, is a relatively productive player. So he has longevity there. And, he would have just become a foundational piece there for the Wizards. And, maybe he's not as injury prone as John Wall, though he did miss some time. He's been missing some time lately. But I think he would have really, become a building block, would have been a nice fit. When I think the next year or the year after that, they would go and get Bradley Beal. So there would have been two, solid guys they have there, and maybe not as much clashing between Beal and Wall that you saw in those later years.
Yeah, I had the same pick. He's the best player in this draft. He has the most points, I believe, close to most rebounds, most minutes played, et cetera, et cetera. So he's an excellent player. What's really cool about Paul George is we've had like different versions of him.
Mm-hmm.
We had the Indiana Pacers, Paul George, when they were kind of the second best team in the East during the Heatles run when LeBron and D Wade were in Miami. Then we get like the short run of him as OKC Paul George, and then now we get LA Clippers Paul George, who's just all around great player. I know he gets a lot of shit on social media, people calling him Pandemic P and all that, and all the jokes about him not being clutch, especially because of that Gatorade commercial. But he's a really good player. He's all NBA a few times. He's just, he has had some health issues, but I think it's an easy pick for the Wizards and a franchise-altering type pick for them.
Absolutely.
All right. Next up, we have the Philadelphia 76ers with the second overall pick. They selected Evan Turner out of Ohio State. So small forward, power forward, shooting guard, really all over the place. So who did you have the Sixers taking with the second pick?
Yeah, I had him actually going John Wall here. So, obviously when healthy, John Wall was pretty good talent. He's fallen off a little bit in these twilight years of his, but trying to make a resurgence here with the Clippers. But, I thought that would give him a nice pairing with Drew Holiday. And then, in 2013, they don't end up drafting MCW. And then also he's a nice fit next to this young Iguodala. So it gives the Sixers, guys that can just run the court and just really a solid backcourt. And maybe they don't trade Drew Holiday either. So I think that would have been a good pick for the Sixers and a lot of talent on that team.
Okay. Makes sense. I'm high on John Wall, but I actually had DeMarcus Cousins here for the Sixers going second overall. Not much of a drop or not much of a jump up from him. For him, he went fifth overall. I think he's a really good player. He just suffered a lot in Sacramento with a bad front office. Not like Philly is that much better, but this was process. So I think they would have taken better care of him. He would have been a nice 1-2 punch with Elton Brand in the front court. I think right before this draft, they traded for Spencer Hawes, ironically from Sacramento. But I think maybe if they had Boogie Cousins, circled at that number 2 pick, they don't make that trade because he can play center for them. And I think, I'm a big fan. I think he's gotten a bad rap for his personality, and I think he's an incredible player when healthy. And I feel really bad for him, the way things have gone for him the past few years.
Yeah, man, things went downhill for him as right after he tore that Achilles right in New Orleans. So it's been an uphill battle for him since then. I think that's the turning point of his career was his tearing his Achilles. And then
Achilles, then the ACL.
And
I
the
think
ACL, right? Yeah.
He came close to a ring with the Warriors, which would have been nice. I remember hearing the news that they signed him. I think I was like out shopping with my wife. I was at Ross or something, and I just start like laughing uncontrollably, like we just got Boogie, and she was like looking at me like I was crazy. He obviously didn't play much.
He didn't play much, yeah.
And he was like a shell of himself. But
Mm-hmm.
it was a fun idea when I first heard it. So
definitely a fun idea. I even bought a shirt that had all the Warriors depicted as the Monstars, and Boogie was the fifth Monstar. I was like, oh man, this is a dope shirt. I gotta buy that. But
if only we knew.
Yeah.
All right. So next up with the third overall pick, the then New Jersey Nets select power forward center Derek Favors out of Georgia Tech. Who did you have them taking third overall?
Yeah, I have them going Gordon Hayward. Obviously, there was a need for a scorer there on the New Jersey Nets. And, maybe they don't go ahead and make those trades for Joe Johnson and Gerald Wallace and, give up future draft picks for that kind of stuff when they have a nice young scorer in Gordon Hayward. Though Derek Favors was flipped in that Deron Williams trade, so maybe Gordon Hayward ends up in Utah anyways because of that trade. But maybe the Nets don't make that trade and they keep Hayward around, and he's a nice centerpiece for that franchise as they move to Brooklyn.
Yeah, he's another guy that's had some serious injury issues, a lot of unlucky injuries, and then I feel like once you get that one big injury, then everything else sort of follows, and you're just going to keep getting hurt, which is kind of a theme that we're seeing with this top five. So I had the Nets picking John Wall. So just a small drop for me from first overall to third overall. They had Devin Harris on the roster at this time, but he could play the two. They draft John Wall, and then they don't have to trade for Deron Williams. I know Deron Williams was at this point, perhaps the best point guard in the league, maybe one of the best. There was that D-Will CP3 conversation for a few years. But basically this allows the Nets to build a little more organically and not have to trade Harris and Favors for Deron Williams and give up. I think they give up 2 future firsts. So it allows them to keep their guys or their picks and just build a better squad.
Yeah. So. And also doesn't give us the core 4 that they introduced us to when they moved to Brooklyn. You remember the core 4, Brook Lopez, Gerald. I'm like, what? You guys are calling this the core 4?
Yeah, they had to do something, I guess, to get some eyes on the team. But so let's see. Next up, the Minnesota Timberwolves with the 4th overall pick selected small forward Wesley Johnson out of Syracuse. Who did you have them taking 4th overall?
Yeah, I have the Timberwolves actually going DeMarcus Cousins. Clearly, they needed a center. They were starting Darko Milicic at that time, so he already was a bust in his career at that point. And so, obviously Cousins, instant upgrade to their offense, becomes the focal point of this team. He kind of becomes that young guy that could lead this team. And not much better of a situation in Sacramento, but maybe he does a little more there in Minnesota. But he did a lot in Sacramento, so you can't honestly blame the guy. But maybe he doesn't request a trade out as the T-Wolves build.
Yeah, and I think Flip Saunders was still the coach at this time.
I think so. I believe so.
We should just fact check that. But anyway, not too much better of a situation than Sacramento for Boogie if he goes to Minnesota. So for me, obviously, Boogie is not on the board anymore. So I had them taking Gordon Hayward. So we flipped our orders a little bit. Mm-hmm. There's a clear need at center. Like you said, they were starting Darko, but they picked, a small forward essentially in Wesley Johnson, and Gordon Hayward is about the same size as Wesley Johnson, same position, all that stuff, but is a considerably better player, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So, I had Gordon Hayward going 4th to the Timberwolves.
Yeah, it looks like we just flipped the order of our top 4, but
and what's crazy about Hayward is like even with all the injuries that he's had, it seems like he hasn't played a full season in 4 or 5 years.
It's been a while.
He's still 4th in total points from this class, 8th in rebounds, and 4th in assists. So he does it all. and he does it all really well. And he's still a good player when healthy, but that's the big caveat.
Yep.
Okay. So speaking of DeMarcus Cousins, with the 5th overall pick, the Sacramento Kings selected power forward center DeMarcus Cousins out of the University of Kentucky. So he is not on the board for either of us. So who did you have them take instead?
Yeah, this is when this draft starts getting a little dicey, and you're like, damn, who do I start taking? Who's worthy of these top 5 picks? Because this was not a great draft by any means. So the top 4 is pretty clear, and then after that, there's I would say a pretty big drop off. So
yeah, I think Bledsoe. we vary quite a bit in our picks, which is nice. Makes things interesting.
I was looking at it. I think we kind of went up, and I mean, we had the same guys almost in the lottery, but there's some variation there. There's some guys I left out, but we'll get there.
Just some guys we value differently, I guess. But yeah, so who did you have them take instead of Boogie?
Yeah, so I had him going Eric Bledsoe here. I thought there was a need at point guard for them. I mean, they were kind of running Tyreek at point guard at this time. He's kind of going between point guard, shooting guard. The only other point guard on the roster was Bino Udre, who was okay, but obviously Eric Bledsoe kind of upgrades that position for them. He was played at a decently high level for the Clippers and then the Bucks and other teams he's been on. But, I thought he'd be a nice pairing with Tyreek. Maybe not a great shooting backcourt, but otherwise that's a great defensive backcourt, a backcourt that can do pretty much everything else. But Tyreek quickly fizzled out of the league. I don't know, he had a cocaine problem or something like that. But, Eric Bledsoe would have been there longer term for the Kings.
Yeah, I think he had some kind of drug problem, and he's working out for NBA teams, but hasn't made the jump back. I like Bledsoe. I have him in my lottery, but a little later. So I had them taking Greg Monroe. So I know he's a bit of a dinosaur in this era of the NBA, but remember this was 12 years ago when post play was still considered I guess like at a premium. And they get the second best offensive big man or offensive center in this draft. They miss out on Boogie, so Monroe's not a terrible consolation. Maybe he doesn't have the same attitude issues that Boogie does, which obviously are kind of a product of organizational mismanagement and dysfunction. But I think, in 2010, he makes sense in this lottery. All right. Oh, this one is painful. With the sixth overall pick, the Warriors selected, I get small forward / power forward, Ekpe Udo.
I think at that time he was being billed as a center.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, power forward center, not even small forward. Undersized power forward center. I think he's 6'8", 6'9". I hated the pick at the time.
100% hated it.
It didn't make sense to me then. It doesn't make sense to me now. But he was good in the tournament. I do remember that. So maybe they hoped he could recreate some of that. But anyway, who did you have the Warriors taking instead of Udo?
Yeah, I had them going Greg Monroe here. Clearly they needed a center. They were starting, I think, Anthony Randolph at center at this point. Like, I don't know what they were doing. So clearly there was a need for a center. And, you outlined it. Greg Monroe, pretty good offensive player, could score, could pass out of the post, could rebound. Obviously defense was lacking for him. But at that time, that's what the Dubs kind of needed. A big man who could kind of come inside and score and do kind of that work for them. Though I wonder, if they do take Greg Monroe, do they end up making that Andrew Bogut trade, which, jumpstarts that dynasty? But, maybe they still move Greg Monroe because they did move Ekpe Udo in that trade. So, but overall, it would have been a nice fit for the Dubs at that time.
Yeah, I think they were starting Andres Biedrich at center.
Oh, Biedrich, my God.
But we don't need to go down that wormhole because I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I know they went between Randolph and Biedrich. That's what it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously not a great 1-2 punch at center. So, yeah, I wouldn't go down that wormhole, at least not on this pod. So I actually had them taking Evan Turner. So I'm, no spoilers, I guess, but you don't have him on your lottery. And I was very surprised. So I guess that is a spoiler, but I was really surprised because maybe I overrate him, but I thought he was always a pretty good player, brought some toughness to a team, and he could play, 4 out of the 5 positions pretty well, or maybe 3 out of 5. And he's kind of a jack of all trades. Like he's, ninth in points and rebounds in this class and fifth in assists. So I think that's got to mean something. But I guess we can talk about why you don't have him on your lottery a little later.
Yeah, we'll do that. I'll get into it for you.
All right. So with the 7th overall pick, the Detroit Pistons selected center Greg Monroe out of Georgetown. So he is off the board in both of our drafts. So who did you have the Pistons taking instead?
Yeah, I still had him going center here. I had him selecting Hassan Whiteside. Obviously, the Pistons still had Ben Wallace here and, Rip Hamilton and Tayshaun Prince on the roster. So those guys could have been good role models for Whiteside, who was obviously a bit of a knucklehead in his earlier years. I think he went in the second round. Yeah, he went second round, pick 33 to I believe the Kings I believe it was the Kings. But
that's right.
And then he was out of the league in 4 years or something like that. And he was like in China and doing actually he was out of the league in 1 year and he was in like China for a couple of years. And then he kind of came back. And so I thought, maybe Whiteside, but we saw he has talent. He's a talented guy. He can, rebound, clean the glass, block shots, do that. And then also kind of give you somewhat of an offensive game. And so I thought, maybe he just needed these guys like, Ben Wallace and Rip Hamilton and Tayshaun Prince to kind of take the knucklehead out of him. But
yeah, he was so he was on the Kings for 2 years, played 19 games, so not much at all. And yeah, he played in Lebanon and China, so not exactly the highest of leagues, but then he just resurfaced in Miami a few years later and played pretty well. And he's still in the league.
Yeah, he still is.
Not, he's not playing a lot of minutes, but he's a decent backup big for Utah. So yeah, that means something. So I had them actually taking Derek Favors. So some of the same reasons that you gave about, them still needing a big man and needing someone to transition after the Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, Tayshaun Prince era. So I liked Favors more than Whiteside. Obviously he's not as good defensively, but I think he's more mobile, gives you a little more on the offensive side, and maybe they see that as an upside or an option because Ben Wallace isn't giving you anything on offense, so it might have been a nice guy to bring off the bench. So yeah, all right. Next up, the LA Clippers selected Al-Farouq Aminu out of Wake Forest with the 8th overall pick. So Aminu is still on the board for both of us. And who did you have the Clippers taking?
Yeah, I had the Clippers sticking with this pick. I had him keeping Al-Farouq Aminu. So I did debate Derek Favors here. I was like, oh, maybe the Clippers could take Derek Favors, but they were already kind of stacked. They had Blake, they had DeAndre, they had Chris Kaman out coming off the bench. So otherwise I would have gone Derek Favors, but there was clearly a need for the Clippers at either point guard or small forward at this time. And point guard, it didn't seem like a stretch here to pick up a point guard because after Eric Bledsoe, my goodness, the point guards in this draft are pretty bad.
And Eric Bledsoe ended up on the team anyway. He was,
he did
18th overall to
yes, he did
OKC and then was traded to
exactly. So but their small forwards were bad. If you look at that roster, you couldn't even you would look at that roster and be like, damn, these are the small forwards. Like they're not even they were out of the league in 1 or 2 years. So Aminu, pretty solid defender, rebounder. He can kind of do it all. And I felt like he was a big defender, especially watching him in Portland when he was facing the Warriors and guarding Steph and stuff like that. And so he kind of developed into this 3-and-D kind of dude. So for that reason, I just had the Clippers sticking with him.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I have him coming up a little later. So I actually had them taking Patrick Patterson with this pick. He went 14th overall to the Rockets. So a little bit of a jump here. This is some outside of the box thinking, I think, on my part. But like you said, they never had a good small forward. They had Matt Barnes kind of near the end of his career. They had started Wesley Johnson, Luke Mbamute. So they were constantly looking for that small forward that could give them some offensive punch. And I know that Patterson primarily played power forward with the Rockets and the Raptors. but I think he ended up being a pretty good offensive player. He was a pretty good shooter. He actually didn't shoot, I think, any threes until his third year in the league, which shows kind of the transformation of the league towards more, three and D type guys. But he ended up being a 36% 3-point shooter for his career, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think he could have filled that role for them, especially during the Lob City era, when again they were just starting these guys that couldn't do much for them. So I don't know, some out of the box thinking, like I said. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's interesting because, I mean, given the talent pool in this draft, I think Patrick Patterson is definitely a lottery guy, and he'll come up on our board too. But definitely a guy who, it was interesting because he wasn't known as a 3-point shooter, and he developed himself into a 3-point shooter by the time his career was kind of over here in the league. Is he? I think he's out of the league now.
Yeah, I don't think so. Don't think he's still
Yeah.
around. But yeah,
But
like
yeah,
when I looked at his basketball reference, I was like, yeah, I remember him being a pretty good shooter.
Yeah.
But yeah, he didn't shoot 0.0% for the first 2 or 3 years.
He was
of his
mostly
career.
like a kind of drive and post up kind of dude in college, and so to develop that 3-point shot, it's not a bad pick. I could see it.
Yeah, so it's a credit to him for sure. All right. Next up, with the 9th overall pick, the Utah Jazz select shooting guard, small forward Gordon Hayward out of Butler. So obviously Hayward is off the board in both of our drafts. So who did you have them take instead?
Yeah, I have the Jazz going Lance Stephenson here. Who was
Lance Stevenson? That's my guy.
Born ready, man. Born ready. That's his nickname. So I think he went 40th in round 2. So big jump for him here. But clearly the Jazz needed shooting guards. Lance is a pretty talented guy. He could be a ball handler for them as well. And, would pair nicely with Al Jefferson and AK-47 and Derone if the Jazz had kept Derone. So maybe the Jazz are like, oh, we got a solid, core here, and maybe we don't trade Derone and keep him. But obviously there were issues with coaching and stuff like that pushed Derone away. But I thought, yeah, it made a lot of sense for the Jazz to take a shooting guard and maybe, take some pressure off Derone there.
Yeah, I debated this for a long time in my head. It makes sense on paper. I just don't think it would have been a good culture fit in Utah. He's not a Utah type player to me.
That's fair.
If you catch my meaning.
Yeah.
So
especially with Jerry Sloan there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know he had some character issues, I think, like an incident in high school, nothing too crazy, but he always seemed to have some kind of attitude issues. And I just couldn't see Utah taking him. So for that reason, Eric Bledsoe is still on my board. So I had them taking Bledsoe. I know they still had obviously Darren Williams, but there would have been a nice backcourt of him and Bledsoe. And of course, if they do still end up trading away Darren Williams, they do get the point guard of the future, and they could have paired him with Devin Harris in this, alternate universe. So I like Bledsoe. I think he's, a pretty good player. He does a lot. I think he's faded, obviously, in recent years, but when he was happy and he was in the right situation, he was a really good player. So that's why I had the Jazz swoop him here.
Yeah, I like it.
All right. So with the 10th overall pick, the Indiana Pacers select Paul George, a small forward out of Fresno State. So Paul George went first overall in our draft. So nice jump from 10th, where he was originally selected. So who did you have them taking instead?
Yeah, I had him going Derek Favors over here. So I thought, 10 is probably, he started sliding a little bit on my board. I was like, I can't put Favors below 10 here. So I think he would have been a nice addition there to that Indiana front court. He would have paired well with Hibbert and Granger, giving him some size in the front court. And if you look at his kind of career averages, he's almost a double guy. And he's been kind of doing that every season, in and out, double doubles almost every season. So, good scorer, good rebounder. And I think he would have stayed in Indiana Pacer for quite some time and would have given that front court guy that they needed after David West kind of left the team.
Yeah, and this is still an era where playing two bigs that can't really shoot was still a thing. So that's a good pick. I think it makes sense. It makes sense with the fit alongside a Roy Hibbert, especially gives them a little more offensive versatility. So Favors is off the board in my draft. So I actually had them taking Lance Stevenson. So they obviously picked him later on in the draft, 40th overall. So means that they liked him. They didn't care too much about his character issues or his attitude. And if they knew what he would have done for them, which, you know, he was an important player during those, during the Heatles era, where the Pacers were, again, the second best team in the East pretty consistently. I think they would have used the 10th overall pick on him, especially with Paul George off the board. So in my world, Born Ready is still a Pacer.
There you go.
All right. So next up, with the 11th overall pick, the then New Orleans Hornets select power forward center Cole Aldrich out of Kansas. So who did you have them taking here?
Yeah, I actually had them going Larry Sanders, who was taken number 15th in this draft. He's obviously, he didn't play a long time in the league. He played about 6 seasons, but man, what a defensive monster that guy was. I think his career average is 2 blocks a game. And, you know, he just would have been an upgrade over Emeka Okafor. And I think at this time, you know, they had CP3 and David West on the roster. So would have just given him a defensive force to kind of, you know, play behind CP3 and David West and, you know, maybe propel them a little further in the playoffs. But man, Larry, I know he only played 6 seasons, but I think he retired due to some mental health issues, things like that. But man, when he was playing, he was pretty beastly of a defender.
Yeah, he was really good. And like you said, he did have a shortened career because of some mental health issues. I think he had some anxiety and depression. So it's one of those guys that just happened to be playing ball in the wrong era. You know, if he was, you know, a few years older, he would have been, you know, more understood, and maybe the team would have handled his issues with a little more sensitivity, you know, thanks to guys like DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love, who have made the mental health conversation a little easier to have. I did not have him on my board. I think, you know, in that I still, you know, think he would have had those same issues because, you know, nothing is changing. I don't think playing on another team, you know, fixes your anxiety and your depression. But yeah, I'm a big fan. I remember a few years back, the Warriors worked him out. There were some rumors that he was going to sign, which I was really excited about. Obviously, it didn't work out. And he's been out of the league for quite a while. I think he played in the Big 3 league for a bit, but that didn't work out either. So yeah, hopefully he's doing well in his mental life or his mental health and his personal life. But yeah, so I had the Hornets picking Avery Bradley. So good player in his prime, great defender in his prime. I think him and Chris Paul would have made for a menacing defensive backcourt, even if they're a little small. Obviously, Chris Paul gets traded shortly after this, I think the following summer, to the Clippers. But, you know, I don't want to go down that wormhole of what happens if they draft Bradley. But I think if the Hornets are picking in this draft with the thought of keeping Chris Paul, I think this pick makes sense here.
Yeah, I can see
and
that.
I couldn't see him drop any further, I think, because he was really good in his prime, and he was big on, you know, on the Celtics those few years.
3 years.
What was that?
I say his prime lasted like 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's slim pickings here, man.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, 100%. It's slim pickings.
Yeah,
I agree.
We're not talking cream of the crop here. All right. So with the 12th overall pick, the Memphis Grizzlies selected Xavier Henry out of Kansas. Who did you have them picking here?
Yeah, I had him going Patrick Patterson here. So, like you said, great bench guy. I think he would have learned a lot being in Memphis, you know, sitting behind Zach Randolph, would have developed that post game a little more, would have, you know, had more time to work on his threes. One interesting thing about Patrick Patterson, when you're looking at an advanced metric, the value over replacement player, he was surprisingly 9th in this draft class. So that was a shock for me to see him that high. I was like, oh, he was good, he was solid. Like, I guess there's just like, maybe we just kind of forgot about how decent he was as a bench guy and a role player. So I was like, oh, okay, I got to have him in the lottery here. So I had him going to Memphis where you could kind of sit and learn and maybe develop a little more.
Yeah, he was always like a do-it-all type dude. He's a box score stuffer, and those guys always, you know, contribute to winning when they're on good teams. They're like, you know, ceiling raisers versus floor raisers. Mm-hmm. And it sounds stupid to say, but I had him on fantasy a couple times, and I was like, oh, this guy is he's putting up numbers,
Right. Yeah.
across all the categories, filling up that box score. So that's why I like him. I guess I like him a little better than you do, but you still have him in the lottery, and that's all that's all that matters. So I had the Grizzlies actually taking Hassan Whiteside. So everything you said about him being a knucklehead and perhaps getting some mentorship from Ben Wallace, Tayshaun Prince, et cetera, et cetera. Basically the same situation in Memphis. I think he would have been a good fit on that grit and grind team. He could have maybe gotten straightened out with some tough love from Zebo and Marc Gasol, and he would have been a nice third big for them. And I think he would not have had to go play in China if he was on this team, because again, they would have made sure that he was on the straight and narrow and kept his attitude in check.
Yeah, especially Zach Randolph there.
Yeah, Zebo doesn't take shit from anybody, so he would have
no. And he's probably learned from his time on the Jailblazers. So
yeah, that's right. He learned everything not to do.
Exactly.
Don't take weed in a foil package like David Sotomayor. I don't know what else these guys did, but yeah, the Jailblazers, one of the all-time nicknames in sports history. All right. So next up, the Toronto Raptors with the 13th overall pick selected Ed Davis out of North Carolina. So who did you have them pick here?
Yeah, I had him going Avery Bradley here. So, gives them the solid wing defender that they were lacking, provides some defense, some shooting, which the Raptors did not have at all in their backcourt at that time. I think they had Jose Calderon starting at point guard, great offensive player, but no defense whatsoever in that backcourt. So, would have been a great 6-man eventually for them as well once, Kyle Lowry joined the team. So, that would have been a pretty good lineup. You could have gone Lowry, Bradley, DeRozan as kind of a closeout lineup. So, yeah, just a good depth piece for them and maybe even a potential starter for them there.
Yeah, a nice 3-guard lineup with him. I guess I don't even know if you consider DeMar DeRozan a guard anymore. I think he played power forward.
He's been playing power forward for the Bulls.
And I think for the Spurs too, it's just a complete. Might as well have been a different sport even 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think the Raptors took him as a shooting guard.
Yeah, he was playing 2-guard. I mean, for a while, I think the whole time there he was their 2-guard, which makes sense given his skill set. But it's a different game. So Avery Bradley is off the board for me. So I had them taking Al-Farouq Aminu. So great nickname, the Chief. I always liked him, even when the Warriors were going up against him. He seems like a Raptors type player to me, right? He's long, he's athletic, decent enough shooter. He's versatile. He can play power forward and small forward. The Raptors were not a good team. They were playing Amir Johnson at power forward and Sonny Weems at small forward. If you said who to that name, yeah. So they could definitely have used an upgrade. And yeah, I like him as a player. I like those guys who are kind of the junkyard dogs. They can do it all. They won't, change the course of a series or anything for you, but I think he's just a good enough player. And at this point in the draft, you can take good enough with the 13th overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically the 2010 version of OG Anunoby, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And that's again why, I mean, they like these foreign dudes or dudes with foreign names. So Siakam, Anunoby, Aminu, it all fits.
There you go.
In Toronto.
Yep.
All right. And with the last pick of the lottery, so the 14th overall pick, the Houston Rockets selected power forward center Patrick Patterson out of Kentucky. So he's off the board for both of us. So who did you have them taking instead?
Yeah, I had the Rockets actually going Ed Davis here. Obviously a solid rebounder off the bench. And I think that's kind of what they were looking for when they took Patrick Patterson, to have some bench scoring and bench rebounding. So, he would have been a guy that comes off the bench and, plays off behind Luis Scola and Yao Ming, and, just a good, decent defender, rim protector, and, just gives that max effort there. And he would have fit in nicely there with the Rockets.
Yeah, he was on the bubble for me. I almost had him in, but then I saw some dollar signs in my eyes, and I have them picking an undrafted player, actually. So Jeremy Lin. I had them taking Jeremy Lin with the 14th overall pick. So Linsanity, the organization at this point, they had some issues with Kyle Lowry, who's their current starting point guard. They ended up trading him essentially for salary cap reasons. And those dollar signs are flashing because they already have Yao Ming, who's a huge marketing asset for them in China. So why not double down on a good enough player in Jeremy Lin, which is, eventually what they did, because he ended up on the Rockets anyway, I think 2 years later, and played, 2 full seasons for them before moving on. So, I mean, Ed Davis or Jeremy Lin, I think you take a little bit of a chance on Jeremy Lin. I think he had a pretty high ceiling. I think a lot of teams believed in him. I think the Nets saw him as a building block type piece before he got hurt. So, I always liked him, big fan. And I think his NBA career is done, but I know he's still trying to hang around. I think he played in the G League last year for the Santa Cruz Warriors. So he's still around the game. So,
yeah. I think he's done career-wise. I think, ironically enough, he probably played with the Rockets Summer League before he went on to New York. I think that he played with the Warriors and the Rockets, I think, at some point in their summer leagues or their G League teams at some point before he went on to New York. So I think the Rockets did cut him, and then they're like, oh crap, like after Linsanity, they're like, we want him back.
Yeah, right.
I think they gave him like the poison pill contract too at that point.
Yeah, and I think the Knicks and Carmelo were happy to see him leave.
Yeah,
at least
so
Carmelo was.
Carmelo definitely was like, damn, this guy stole my stardom, man. Get him out of here, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I was living in New Jersey, or North Jersey at the time of Linsanity, so I was like around for it, and I just remember people going crazy, man. They were on TV every night. It was must-see TV.
Yeah.
And then Carmelo came back from injury.
He's like, bro, go to the bench, learn your role.
Right. He's like, wait, this is my team, bro. Get out of here.
Yeah.
And it was over, as soon as it started. So, I always had a soft spot for him.
Sure.
Because of that. All right, so those are our lottery picks. There were some honorable mentions, some guys on the bubble. So who did you have on your bubble?
Yeah, Jeremy Lin was one. Obviously, undrafted guy, like you said, blew up with Linsanity. He was there. He was in the back half, considered for some of those spots. Trevor Booker was another one. He, I think, was a first round pick, went 23 overall. Another kind of power forward, very much in the mold of Patrick Patterson. Could kind of do a few things here and there, but
Devin Booker's brother, apparently. I did not.
Oh, really?
That. Yeah.
Really? Okay, I had no clue Trevor Booker was his brother. I thought
that's what Basketball Reference told me. I hope they're not
really. And someone might have accidentally slipped that in there.
Yeah, right.
If I remember Trevor Booker, he looks nothing like Devin Booker.
I don't know, man. Take it up with the guys at Basketball.
We'll have to fact check that later. Yeah. We'll fact check that later. Another guy was Ish Smith, obviously another solid, point guard. I think he went undrafted here.
Also undrafted.
And then the last guy, Namjan Bialitsa. He went in the second round here.
Nemanja.
Yeah, whatever. Butchered his first name, but got his last name right.
NBA champion with the
NBA Warriors, champion, man. Yeah, exactly. I think he was in the mix here, but I do remember that he didn't come into the league until like a few years after this draft. He was kind of like a stash in the Euro League, so he came out like 3-4 years later. So I think that dropped him for me. But obviously, once he got into NBA, he was a great shooter, great scorer. So definitely.
Yeah, I always liked him, even on when he was on the Kings for those few years. So I was happy, obviously, when the Warriors signed him, and it ended up working out pretty well. He's
he's solid guy.
A nice contributor in the finals. So I had a lot of the same honorable mentions. I had Ish Smith, who I've always liked. He's kind of just that like point guard, just that typical prototypical backup point guard. Like, he's not going to win you games. He's not going to lose you games. He's just kind of around. Mm-hmm. And he's played like on every team in the league. I think he's played on 10 different teams. So it'd be a nice trivia question, but I always liked him. Gravis Vasquez, I hadn't. Yeah, I thought about it, but not too long. Same thing with Jordan Crawford and Landry Fields. They're both like useful NBA players, in their roles, but I didn't give them too much thought. Larry Sanders. So I know you had him in your lottery. I just, because of the issues, I couldn't make that leap, but obviously one of the most talented players in this draft. I think we can say that with some confidence. And then, of course, last but not least, my guy Boban. So he was in this draft. I believe he was actually either drafted or undrafted.
I think he was undrafted. He was
in this class. Undrafted, but he was part of this class. Didn't make his NBA debut for another 5 or 6 years, I think, with the Spurs. But he's one of the all-time personalities in the NBA. He's still around, so
I feel like you're just
good for
drafting
him.
him for his personality.
I mean, if you take Boban now and what he does and put him in 2010 NBA, like he's killing it.
I don't know if he's
But
killing it. He's getting some run. I'll give you that. He's getting some run.
yeah, he's not doing anything now, but yeah, he's a good dude. Seems like a good locker room guy. So all the credit goes to him. All right, so those are honorable mentions. So we're gonna take a quick look at the guys that were not redrafted. So there's some variation here. Obviously, for example, Evan Turner was one of the guys that was not drafted by you, but I still had him in my lottery. So I think he had a really high ceiling. He was a do-it-all type player. But why did you not have him in your draft?
Yeah, I mean, there was an argument for him to. I guess I probably should have included him in my honorable mentions. He probably was a candidate for honorable mentions. I just left him off. Just forgot to mention him. But he is an argument. He was a lottery player probably in this draft. But I think for me, it was just. I guess maybe I'm just remembering this draft a little too much, and it was the hype of Evan Turner coming out, and it was like, oh, Evan Turner is going to be like this, do-it-all shooting guard. He's like going to be this next level shooting guard, and then he didn't become that. So maybe that's me just remembering those expectations and him not living up to those, kind of devaluing him there. And I mean, and I kind of took a look at some more. If you look at some of more the advanced metrics on Evan Turner, he doesn't kind of live up to even. I mean, but watching him play, he was a good role player for the Sixers for a little bit, and then the Celtics. So he did play pretty well for like 2-3 years.
He was on the Blazers. Those Blazers teams as well.
Once his expectations were tapered down, he became a much better player. So
yeah, he's definitely not second overall pick quality, but I think
yeah.
Just looking at your picks, I think he's better than Ed Davis.
Oh, come on! Wow.
But whatever, it's all good. Another name is Wesley Johnson. So I think he had the tools, couldn't put it together, couldn't really shoot. He bounced around. So just one of those guys who didn't work out.
Exactly.
Ekpe Udo, we talked about it. He was just too small.
Too scrawny.
Yeah.
Dude need to get in the weight room.
And he never developed, much of an offensive game. So just, another one in the long line of horrible picks by the Warriors. So
and quick question for you. Was this after they had drafted Patrick O'Brien or before? I can't remember.
I think it was after or before. No, I have to look this up now because you're making me question my.
I just know the Warriors repeated the same mistake in drafting Patrick O'Brien. I just couldn't remember.
They drafted Patrick O'Brien in 2006. So yeah, it was a few years before, but they just kept making the same mistake. It's
like, why do you keep getting the same type of center?
And just the same type of player.
Yeah.
Undersized is like him.
And then this Randolph. I think Randolph. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't know what they were doing.
Tweeners. They galaxy brained it. The next guy, Cole Aldrich. So he did not survive our redraft. He has one of the worst nicknames, according to Basketball Reference. They call him Cole
I'm reading
Sword.
this.
That's awful. Why would you?
That's awful. Why would you want that to be a nickname?
I doubt he picked it.
I will give you this. He did show some flashes as a Knick when he was on the Knicks for a couple of years. He did show flashes, but he just never developed for whatever reason. He was supposed to be touted as this Kevin Love type player, right? Could shoot it, could block shots, kind of rebounder, but he just never got there.
Yeah, he's another one of those guys like the Landry Fields that were like a useful player, but not lottery consideration at all. The next guy is Xavier Henry. So I think he only played a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years in the league.
5 years.
Yeah, and he just had some injury issues. So maybe he would have been a good player without the injury issues.
Yeah, and he showed flashes when I think he bounced around a little bit and ended up on the Lakers. And he was like, he kind of showed like, oh, he can be this kind of guy that can score, get to the basket, and then dude ruptures his Achilles, and that was the end of his playing career.
Yeah, that's a theme of this draft. There's a lot of guys that suffer some catastrophic injuries. Maybe their careers aren't quite over, but they're never quite the same. And then last, Ed Davis. So he survived your redraft, did not survive mine. He's just meh. That's just he's not just that kind of player. He's just like, he's good, he's useful, but minimal upside. He's just to me, just a big body. So yeah, nothing special about him.
All right. That was
You're
no.
offended.
No, I'm not offended. I'm not.
I'm
I wasn't a
kidding.
big Ed Davis. I mean, he's right there on the bubble for me. So
I'm kidding. Alrighty. So I'll go ahead and I'll recap my picks. You recap yours, and then we'll say goodbye. So first overall pick was I had Paul George going to the Washington Wizards, DeMarcus Boogie Cousins going to the Sixers, second overall, John Wall to the then New Jersey Nets going third overall, Gordon Hayward to the Minnesota Timberwolves at fourth, Greg Monroe to the Sacramento Kings at fifth, Evan Turner to the Golden State Warriors at sixth, Derek Favors to the Detroit Pistons at seventh, Patrick Patterson to the Clippers at eighth, Eric Bledsoe to the Jazz at ninth, Lance Stevenson to the Pacers at 10th, Avery Bradley to the then New Orleans Hornets at 11th, Hassan Whiteside to the Memphis Grizzlies at 12th, Al-Farouq Aminu to the Toronto Raptors at 13, and last but not least, Jeremy Lin to the Houston Rockets at 14.
All right. I had Paul George going number 1 to the Wizards. I had John Wall going 2 to the 76ers. Gordon Hayward going 3 to the Nets. DeMarcus Cousins going 4 to the Timberwolves. Eric Bledsoe going 5 to the Kings. Greg Monroe going 6 to the Warriors. Hassan Whiteside going 7 to the Pistons. Al-Farouq Aminu going 8 to the Clippers. Lance Stephenson going 9 to the Jazz. Derek Favors going 10 to the Pacers. Larry Sanders going 11 to the Hornets. Patrick Patterson going 12 to the Grizzlies. Avery Bradley going 13 to the Raptors. Ed Davis going 14 to the Rockets.
All right. So that's it for our show today. So let us know on Instagram and Twitter if if we got this wrong, if we got it right. Let us know. We want to hear your thoughts. So make sure to follow and subscribe to our pages on Instagram and Twitter at 4040 Vision Pod. Make sure to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, wherever you get your pods.